Good morning, all you lovely people.
And you not so lovely people as well.
Yes, you as well. Especially you. You really need to have a good morning.
I just wanted to make sure that at least Ryder was called out as well in that intro.
Yeah, I actually unlovely, unlove Ed. Oh, it's a tough life.
Happy Tuesday, everybody.
Yes, welcome back.
Yes.
Hopefully this isn't your first time.
Hopefully it is your first time.
Yeah. Both ways work.
Yes.
Off to a nice start on this lovely Tuesday morning.
Beautiful, beautiful indeed.
Yeah, it's just dark outside.
Oh, man, we were just talking about it. I was like, to reference those who aren't aware that Ryder does not live in my basement. Every morning when we have this show, I've gotten that question a lot. Where does Ryder live? And then I'm like, oh, he lives just down the road. Like,
yeah.
But I was letting him inside this morning. I was like, man, it's so dark. And I was like, and it's about to do freaking daylight savings time. We're going to lose an hour.
It's going to get worse, yeah.
It gets so much darker.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting thing, that whole daylight savings.
Because it doesn't ever feel like you're saving anything. Well, it did when I played football, because this was a time of year when your practice would get shortened dramatically.
Ah, yes.
And so you'd go from having like these 3 to 4 hour practices because eventually it gets so dark that you can't see the ball.
Yeah.
And then you just get hit in the head with it.
Yeah, yeah. So for those who aren't aware, Ryder actually came before electricity, and so they didn't have... They actually played with candles on their helmets.
Yeah.
Like the old mine shaft.
Yeah.
That's how you knew who to hit.
Yes, you just watch the little candle moving around. And, I was really clever. I'd pull the candle out and hold it to the side.
Yeah, that actually would be a very entertaining way to play football.
Yeah, everybody be splattered with hot wax all the time.
Yeah. Except maybe instead of a candle, it's like a flaming torch. And then the ball is made of something flammable.
Oh yeah, right. It's covered in glycerin or something.
He's really got hot hands tonight, Johnny.
Woo! So a hot potato.
Uh, well, yesterday we talked a little bit about DIY. We talked about that in more than one sense. Why don't you give us a little
Yeah,
recap of what we
right.
talked about yesterday,
Oh,
Ryder?
we talked a little bit about, because I've got some projects going and I have worked on some houses in the past, then I have some experience in the field, which is usually the experience of hard knocks, which means, I mess up repeatedly. I get myself into problems and then have to dig myself back out of them. There's also things I got into lately, and even before, which was tools, all the tools you should get into. So we sort of jumped into all that. At some point, I mentioned on my podcast, which is Let Us Think About It, and that's letusthinkaboutit.com. Then on, I think it's step 17, I go off on what is called the stochastic arts, which is basically arts that make sure that you're attentive to things. And this can be arts like being a doctor or a mechanic or something like that. So kind of went through this slightly deeper side to how a physical hobby in the real world can be a type of embodied knowledge that can actually, I think, help you become less narcissistic, less self-involved, and help you engage with the world.
Yeah, and another benefit we talked about DIY, which again, at least here in America, when you say the term DIY, the first thing that comes to mind is some sort of home improvement.
Yes, yeah.
And we're using this as a broader definition. We're defining our term to be a lot broader than that, to include anything that you do yourself, largely. But I guess if I were to come up with a definition off the cuff here, it's some sort of project that you create in the physical world, and that could be cooking, that could be the traditional power tools and things like that, or it could be something else. But one of the other benefits we were talking about with it is that you get to see a project from start to end, and you get to end up with something that you created or modified. I'll add, you don't have to start from scratch when you're doing DIY, and it's something you have. And in the case of one of the things I mentioned, which was cooking, it's something you get to eat and taste, and hopefully, regardless of what type of DIY it is, it's something that you may want to share.
Yeah, no, these are great points. There is something about having this thing that you worked on that's physical in front of you. So many of us now have sort of white collar jobs sitting behind a computer and we're compiling reports or doing something like that. And then you're finished and it just sort of disappears.
Yeah.
You never see it anymore. And that can be disheartening over a long period of time.
Right, which actually brings up one of the other things that we've talked about a few weeks ago, or last week, which was keeping track of all the things that you do, both for yourself and potentially for others if you're going to try and show off a resume or something like that. But also, as you were pointing out, it's good for yourself to know all of the things you've done and also the variety of things you've done, because it's easy to forget those little one-off, two-off types of things you've done, which in the DIY world, I bet there's plenty of those one-off, two-offs that you've done that you've forgotten about in your day.
Oh yeah, and that's the other side of it, is the more of this stuff you do, you forget about it. And then because I don't do it every day, I don't do it frequently, I forget so many things. And it's like I just have to keep on relearning over and over and over again the same lessons. And that's also a nice little metaphor for life, right?
Yeah, you're not lying about that.
Oh.
And if there's, again, like, I just want to point out that Ryder is a great person to learn from, because as someone who fails so frequently, he can tell you all of the different ways you can
By the
fail.
way, don't do that. Yeah, that's mostly I'm just really good at just pointing out things after I'm about halfway into them. So, I start to lift something up and put it on top of something heavy, and then I realize, oh wait, that can't go up there.
Wait, what's that creaking sound? What's that cracking
Why-
sound?
yeah.
Well, I'm Reed Garcia, founder and CEO of Helpful for Life.
And this is Ryder Richards.
Some other guy. Yes, I think that might have been your first titleless one, so it was unique in that
some
way.
other guy, some sort of dude.
Yeah. So, we gave the kind of the highlights of yesterday, but go check that out if you want to learn a little bit more. But what was our challenge from yesterday, Ryder?
Oh, was to DIY something. If I'm not mistaken, it was either, find a tip or come up with a project and do it yourself.
Yeah, and again, as we mentioned, that could be something like around the house. That could be it could be some sort of fun thing that you make outside. You could freaking go get some dirt and some rocks and clay and make something. Just do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it could be 1,000 things, right? And we talked about just getting a recipe is a DIY. If you are normally the kind of person who buys pizza, I just go look up a recipe, try to make pizza from scratch.
Yeah.
It can be small things as well. It can even be things like create an outline for your day. If you haven't ever really scheduled your day, something like just do it yourself, come up with a little block schedule, and carve out what your day will look like. Try it out, see if it works, see if it's better, see if it's worse. Those are part of this is just iterative testing.
Yes, and I will say that the last one Ryder mentioned is a huge one, and we actually we challenged people to do that a few episodes back. I don't remember exactly when, but that one can make a very big difference. My main encouragement for you guys out there with that one is to start simple. It's very easy, and it's a common trap to fall into anytime you're making some sort of improvement. Is okay, I see. Here is the end goal. Here's where I want to be. Nirvana. I will be meditating for 7 hours a day. I will be drinking all of the special things. I'll be taking cold showers. But no, just start simple. As little as, let me write down the one thing that I want to get done tomorrow. And I will feel good if I get that one thing done tomorrow.
Oh,
not
yeah.
not a list of 20 things.
No, calm down. Just
Yeah.
because you can make a list doesn't mean it has to be 20 items long.
Yes.
2 or 3 is plenty.
Yes.
Like,
And
I
one
usually
even
just have one.
sometimes.
It's
Yeah.
like, do the Helpful for Life podcast with Reed
Great
in the
success.
morning.
Very
Check.
nice. I like.
I'm done by 8:30. And then I don't know what I do with the rest of my day. Yeah.
Well, yesterday I was in the bathroom making my own DIY. And that was the end of that joke. Don't worry. Well, today, Ryder, first I wanted to ask out, how are you feeling?
Physically, I'm feeling better today. I was pretty sore yesterday from all the DIY work.
Yeah.
I've been building in the shop, and so different sets of muscles, weird things like spots on your forearms that you didn't know existed.
Yeah.
Yeah, the brain. The brain is always hurting. But yeah, other than that, I'm feeling pretty decent physically. Yeah, had kind of Mondays are always long days for me. Usually I have between 2 and 4 meetings every Monday, and then I do therapy in the evenings on Monday. And so, you sort of go from waking up early to going to sleep late, and it always takes me at least an hour or two to wind down after therapy.
Yeah, no, and that's the good progress of a muscle, right? I mean, you work the thing out, and then it hurts for a little bit, and one of the things you need to do is rest and stretch, and oh, by the way, a part of the recovery is to work it out again, right? And that's all part of the process, and so it's good. It sounds like you got a full body workout. You got your brain in the morning, you got your random arm muscles doing your DIY stuff,
right.
and then you got your emotional and mental workout at night.
Yeah, trying to hit it on all levels. And I stumbled across something the other day which that was relating to this idea of becoming the noble soul. And this is also sort of tied to the idea of becoming a individual rather than becoming an individual rather than a dividual. And the difference being that the dividual is the divided self.
Okay.
And there is something about the idea of most of us being divided most of the time. We have our subconscious and conscious are divided. We haven't found a way to really bridge those successfully. Good and evil have not been sort of conquered in a way that sort of wraps them up into a holistic package. So there's these kind of ideas of tackling these really large, broad topics to sort of become a true individual, a true person who is individuated from others, who is unique, who is unto themselves. And this is, I'm bringing all this up just because it's fresh on my mind, but it seems like there's this idea that we could, by working all these separate muscles, really sort of tap into something and become something else, something that is, I don't know, it's this kind of like long-term life goal, right? It's not enlightenment necessarily, but it's as close to it as maybe I think I could get.
Yeah. Which brought up, one phrase that I've heard many times in my life, which is, people don't change or whatever. And I completely disagree with that notion, by the way. So maybe I'm biased in that regard. But another thing I want to point out is, I mean, we're not going to go too far down this deep
Yeah,
philosophical
sorry,
rabbit hole.
sorry, I just jumped into that
No,
right
no,
off the
that's
bat.
good. But I was going to say, what does it mean to be, right? And
Mm.
one of the things that I was going to say is some of that is just what you do. And if you are going to tell me what you do today isn't different than what you can do tomorrow, then that's just a bold-faced lie, because you can do little different things, even if it's just little, right? And so that's one of the big things we talk about here on this show, and we preach with Helpful for Life is you do not try and make that big radical change all at once. Really focus on the small steps that you can take every day, and that's a big reason that this show exists. Is we want to be a great way for you to start your day, and every day we give you one small thing that you can do to improve your life. And some of those things are one-time things, but some of those things are meant to be kind of repetitive things that you carry on with you. And the goal of this whole thing, whether it's through us or on your own, is as you're going through life, you're making these small changes, new routines, new habits, and it may not look like much over a week or a month or a few months even, but 10 years from now, if you're making these gradual 1% improvements, if you will, to reference the 1% rule that we talked about a week or two ago, then you're gonna be a very different person. I say with air quotes, because at the very least you'll be doing very different things.
Yeah, it's the old input output. If you're not putting anything in or you're putting in trash, I'm sorry, but that's just your brain will process whatever you put into it. If you're spending your time in pursuits that are bettering for you, I would just just by dint of being around those ideas or being involved in those situations repeatedly, I just don't know how you couldn't sort of absorb those almost like osmosis.
And I will say, especially for those of you who struggle with kind of self-doubt and self-worth and not thinking you're good enough, which is a lot of us, by the way, you'll do more than you think, and you will surprise yourself with the things that you'll be able to pick up, the ways you're thinking, the ways that you're talking. Those can all change as you're spending more time around these types of things, this what I'll call the aspirations of what you want to do and what you want to be.
Yeah, it's strange to think that for me anyway, I think it's really sort of took the pandemic to reset my focus. I was one of those people that had a list of the things I wanted to accomplish by the age I was 40, and I accomplished it when I was like 35.
That's awesome.
And yeah, it seems awesome, right? But then I didn't really know what to do with myself after that.
Well, hold on, I've got a special applause effect. Yeah, no, I played an applause, but you can't hear it.
I don't have
it's
the
applause
ear
for
thing.
everybody else but you. There you go. Nice. Give yourself a round.
Well done, Ryder, you braggart.
Yes. No. But anyways, so you had this list and you did it by 35.
Yeah, I got it by 35, and of course at the time I didn't even realize I had accomplished it.
Oh.
Which was funny. It wasn't until was like 38 that I actually looked back and go, oh wait, I did all the things that were on my list. And I was like, oh my goodness, wow, I guess I am a success, right? But I think, in the back of your head, you're targeting something and you eventually get there. So part of it is setting that goal way out in front of you. But then the other thing is that I was sort of circling around to the idea that then I didn't know what to do next. Mm-hmm. And so I was just sort of left drifting around. And the one thing the pandemic sort of made me start reconsidering was, is this what you are? And could you be more? Are you wasting your time? It's okay to take some downtime. It's okay to lie fallow for a while. But eventually there just kind of became this thing like you need to get off your butt and read. And at the time I couldn't read for more than 3 minutes. I tried to open a book and I was just distracted within 3 minutes.
Well, that is amazing because you did not know this until just now, as often goes with our shows. But the topic for today was going to be a couple of things. So thanks for the segue.
You're totally welcome.
So yesterday, maybe it was Friday. Actually, before I get to this segue, I'm going to ruin your good segue because I want to make sure to highlight those in our audience. One,
yes.
Every morning I want to make sure to ask Ryder how he's doing, and we want to have some discussion about that. But I also want to hear from you guys at home. So let us know down in the comments whether you're here live or here after the fact. And also, if you're in the comments and you see somebody else in there, maybe engage with them. It doesn't always need to be us with you. We also really encourage you guys to chat with each other and encourage each other and help each other out. But speaking of helping each other out, we have Danielle here. She says, make her tortilla pizza, which I will say is one of the simplest, fastest, easiest, but most delicious things you can make. And it's literally as little as 3 ingredients. And Danielle, if
Wait,
you
wait, Reed. Only 3 ingredients.
only 3 ingredients,
What?
but wait, there's more. But yeah, Danielle, if you have a blog post on this or a recipe on this, please share. But the basic premise of it is you take a tortilla, and you can choose, however big or small you want. We often go with the fajita size, right?
Yeah.
And we just buy the store-bought one. Of course, you can make from scratch if you want to. And then you put a little pizza sauce on it. Then you put a little mozzarella cheese on it. And there's your 3 ingredients. And you basically put that in the oven at 425 for like 5 minutes-ish, something like that. Just watch it. Make sure it gets the cheese melted, that it gets a little crispy. If you have a pizza stone or a pizza steel, use that. It helps get it crispy. But it's like not that high a carb because it's just one tortilla versus being a thicker crust. And I like to put pepperoni on it, sometimes jalapeno as well. And it's a really good lunch. It's like it makes you get this taste of the pizza without being too like bulky. And of course, you can have multiple if you want. Obviously, different people eat different amounts. But it's actually really good, and we've shared it with a couple people, and now it's become one of their staples.
No, that sounds like a great, easy way to make a nice little snack. And what's the other part? And I dyed my hair, DIY'd my hair.
Yeah,
nice, Danielle.
DIY. I didn't just got the double entendre.
Man.
Nice.
Woo!
Yes, Danielle actually now has blue hair, and she may be doing some tarot for us later today. I need to confirm in our
sure
mid break,
thing,
but
yeah.
it's very possible she might join us later today. And of course, we already have some lovely engagement in the chat with each other. We have Kenny saying hi, Danielle, and then Danielle saying can I? So yes, we're glad to hear you guys are doing good. Danielle is saying definitely burrito size is the way to go.
Okay.
I said fajita. My bad. But yeah, so back to the lovely segue. You were talking about reading. And you know what else is good with the lovely segues? Our intro, so I don't forget to play it.
Yes.
Helpful for life. And we're back. Welcome back to the morning show. I'm Reed
Welcome
Garcia.
back. This is Ryder Richards.
And in case you're wondering how many times can Reed cancel a segue, I don't know, Ryder. You tell me.
Every time. I'm just like throw these softballs out and
Yeah. It's like I don't even know what
swing
you're
and a
gonna
miss.
say,
Swing and a miss.
So Ryder was talking about how he had not. He was struggling being able to sit down and read for more than 3 minutes, and this made me lovely words. Let me rewind. So yesterday or Friday, I don't remember. I was talking about how my business coach was talking about how mastery is part of mastery is just doing really well at the basics and handling those well. And we talked, I think yesterday, we segued that a little bit into meetings and other things like that, and how it doesn't matter how high you up are in the company. Like those are some of the things that the basics still aren't very well. Just to give an example of something basic that isn't done well. Well, that kind of got me thinking a little bit more, and I'm like, well, what are the basics that we should try and master? Maybe we refocus. And I was like, looking back on my life, especially over the last few years, and I'm like, okay, what have been some of the big things for me? And then I started thinking about, how could we talk about this on our show? And I was like, well, the two things I was thinking about were, one, I started reading a lot more, and then I started writing a lot more. And now I'm actually wanting to start sketching, because all of these things are related to inputs and outputs, right? And the more I can think clear and the more I can share my ideas better, I feel like regardless of what I'm going to try to do, it's going to be better.
Yeah. We've mentioned this before, but your mind and your body are the two things you carry with you everywhere, right? But most of the time in our current society, your mind is what's going to do the trick for you. So yeah, if you're carrying those around with you everywhere and you got those suckers trained and you got the right inputs, I would have to assume that something interesting is going to come out, something unique or something slightly different, or, this is part of the thing that I've been thinking about too, is you don't want to cram so much stuff in that it starts falling out again. So you need to have some like retaining mechanisms in there. But that might be like level 2. For step 1 is just maybe getting some input in there.
Yeah. And part of the things that helps with that retention actually is the writing aspect. And, we've talked about it a handful of times on this show. Rome Research has been the main tool that I've been using, and a writer as well. But you can use a paper journal. You could use any type of note thing. But just the act of recording something and writing something down, whether it's digitally or just a hand and pencil or a pen, that has a purpose, which is easy to forget. And that's one of the things that I kind of was reminded of as we went back to basics. And before I forget to make the really lame joke, I just wanted to point out, I don't know I had really thought about it until I had this thing. I was like, oh, yeah, we should probably go back to reading and writing. We should talk about reader and writer.
Oh, man.
It hurts me just as much as it hurts you. It's been a good run, Ryder. You lived a good life. You already did all the things. You checked off your boxes. So you're set. Just go with peace, my friend.
I have, this is the brilliant thing about your brain is it can automatically just filter out things that you don't like.
Oh, that's good.
I don't even remember the last 5
Yeah,
seconds.
there's just this big,
It's
fuzzy block right there. Now
I
that
lost
explains
some
that.
time. I'm back to normal. It's like, I don't even know if it's repression at that point. It's like an old married couple. They just filter each other out.
Yes. Well, let's first talk about reading. So I wanted to give a little backstory on how reading went in my life. One, just so you guys can have a little background, know what my biases are and things like that. And I don't know, maybe you can relate some, right? So for me, I grew up really loving to read, really enjoying reading. And I also, I happen to be good at it,
What kind of stuff did you read?
Yeah, so basically for me, I'm like most people, the main things I start remembering is kind of elementary school onwards, right? I think 7 is the age that's touted as where memory starts to make a big difference. But of course, Danielle is like, oh, I remember when I was 2 weeks old looking up at my mom and she sang me this song in tongues, and I remember it word by word. And I'm like, wow, that's impressive. Maybe you're a demon. I don't know.
No,
but I don't remember that.
I've got one sister that does that too. She's like, no, the minute after I was born, then this happened, and I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in elementary school, one of the things we had was a program called Accelerated Reading, AR for short. And it was kind of one of the early types of gamification used in education, at least that I can think of. And the way it worked, and I'll get to what I read in a second.
Ours was gamified too. It was like,
okay,
read faster or I'll hit you.
Oh, nice. I like that. Yeah.
This is the game.
It's you have the carrot and then you have the stick.
Yeah. We had mostly stick games.
Yes, I like it.
Sticks were much easier to come by than carrots.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this accelerated reading program, the way it worked is we had 9 weeks. Our semester was 2 9 weeks and the year was 4. And so at the end of 9 weeks, you have this goal of number of points you wanted to get, 30 points or something like that. And then the different books you would read, you would take some test at the end, some comprehension test. And if you got a 70 or 80 or whatever, then you'd get those points. And there you get to decide, do I want to read a bunch of smaller, easier books that are maybe worth 2 points, 3 points, or maybe I want to read one that's a little medium size, somewhere in the 10 to 20 points, or maybe like some people in my class, I want to read War and Peace, and it's worth like 150 points.
War and Peace.
Yes, and that's what some people did, or like, and it's like, not for me at least at that time, but some people were like, I'm gonna do it, and I'm like, respect. But the cool thing was, the teacher worked with every individual student, and there was tests to see like what your reading level is, and it's like, okay, well, little Johnny, like you're more of a 2nd grade level, Susie, you're more of a 4th grade level, and you can read faster, or you do better in the test or whatever, so you have a little higher point goal. So it was like everyone had their own individual goals. And then at the end of the 9 weeks or the semester of the year, I don't remember which, if you met all your goals, there was some sort of little party or whatever, right? So that was one way to encourage kids to read. And it was great because you got to choose what you were reading. And that is where I think the key switch is, at least in a lot of Americans, is when you no longer get to read what you want and you have to do something with it, be it write an essay, take a more extensive test, discuss it, especially when a lot of times these required readings, one, sometimes they're either not great or maybe you just don't personally like engage with them. And then also there's just the fact that stubborn thing that I think we all have, but especially as Americans have, especially as Southerners we have, especially as Texans we have, you don't tell me what to do, dang it.
Yeah, I know. I'm an autonomous individual.
Yeah.
That whole thing is pretty fascinating. I think yesterday I mentioned to you that I've got a friend that's in grad school right now who is just hating all of the post-structuralist theoretical texts that she's having to read.
You gotta just define that
Oh,
one.
man.
Post-structural theoretical text. Do you know what that means, or did you
no,
just
no,
put
I'm
some
just,
words
I'm
together?
just stringing syllables together. Doesn't it sound smart though? Yeah, but there's structuralists and then post-structuralists. Then post-structuralists basically deconstruct everything. So the structuralists, you might want to think that we're kind of, as a society, sort of moving into grand narratives, and at some point we started deconstructing those grand narratives to show where, for instance, power lay and how power was distributed amongst these systems. And so Foucault was one of the guys who really brought up power as a major kind of fulcrum point where everyone's getting something out of this, and it's power structures and
Okay.
power dynamics. And so you can kind of get into some of that stuff, and there's guys like Derrida and other people, and they're so busy breaking things down that it does help in a lot of ways. You're not going to end up with these grand narratives where everyone believes the same thing, which kind of tends to lead towards like the National Socialist Party or something like this, right? So part of the idea is to get away from big sweeping narratives and back to sort of more individual truths and individual
Okay.
power, away from grand power. But all of that being said, that you can be forced to read these texts because you're in school. You might not want to. It's horrible. It's painful. It seems like some of these guys, like Derrida especially, seems to be writing just to confuse you. And so this is like beyond taking vitamins. This is really rough to do. And it also though is one of the things where when people come out of grad school, they have all this weird knowledge jammed
Yeah.
into their head that nobody, I think, would choose to read on their own. Maybe so. Maybe people choose to read this on their own.
But
I don't wanna-
percentage-wise,
yeah,
much,
it's a pretty small
Yeah.
percentage who's just like, I'm gonna really hurt myself by reading this today.
right. And so the point being, like, yeah, that is definitely like the phrase "taking your lumps," right? So
Yeah.
it's like you definitely don't want it, but maybe there's some benefit to it after all. But one of the benefits, especially from grad school, is learning a little bit more how to read. And I'm going to answer or transition to that in a second,
Yeah.
but I want to make sure to answer your question about what did I read. So
Yeah.
when I was younger, my kind of the way I'd work is like, I read kind of a medium or a larger book, and then if I needed a couple extra points, I'd have some of the smaller ones to kind of get things going, or
Yeah.
maybe I'd use them kind of as filler in between or whatnot. And so kind of my filler books, there's the Hardy Boys books.
Oh
They-
man,
They were like
Oh.
nice, easy read.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
they were 5 points a piece, and it was just like you could just pile,
Bam,
go through
yeah,
those. So,
yeah. I read a bunch of the Hardy Boys myself.
yeah,
I mean, but by that point, I was a grown man.
yeah, Hardy man. But yeah, so then I read other things I read were like the Redwall series. Are you familiar with that?
No, what's this one?
It's a, and I want to go back. I was just talking with Danielle the other day. We need to go revisit that because it was an interesting thing. It's kind of like the Middle Ages type of setting with castles and battles and things like that. But it was all like rodents. So like the king was a badger, and there were mice and squirrels, and they all could talk. And like the best thing that I remember, and Danielle's the same, this is probably why we're married. She's like, the food in that book, and they had these elaborate feasts, and that was the first time I ever heard about a scone. I was like, now I want a blueberry scone.
Right.
And they did this really good job describing the food, and I was like, all right, now we need to go and we'll commit here roughly to doing it, and some sort of Redwall type of feast we should have.
Okay.
And
It's like Harry Potter with the butterbeer and
yeah,
everything else.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was another type of book that I read, and then I also got a little bit into sci-fi as well, reading Michael Crichton. For those who aren't aware, he's the guy who wrote Jurassic Park. For those who aren't aware, Jurassic Park, it started as a book and then turned into a movie. And then also some, I don't know, I guess more thriller type things like Stephen King, and stuff like that.
Yeah, Michael Crichton's got like 3 or 4 books turned into movies, and you
Yeah.
probably recognize a lot
of them, yeah. And so I really liked what he did, and especially because with a lot of his books too, he does a lot of research before, and so like obviously it's still fiction, but the science and stuff is involved in there, and so it's kind of interesting to read. One of his books, his later books, I think he's passed, early 2000s, I think, or late 2000s, I could be wrong, but he wrote a book called Prey, I believe, Prey, like predator and prey, and it was about a bunch of a swarm of drones, like really small, tiny drones, that had some sort of malicious intent. And it's like, that's very relevant, more and more relevant as every year
Yeah,
goes on.
yeah.
But it was an interesting one to read. What about you? What did you read growing up?
Oh, yeah, Hardy Boys, of course. A lot of sort of coming of age novels at a certain point, right? Like one of them I think was called like Hatchet, and it's about a boy who
Oh
got
yeah,
lost
Hatchet.
out,
Yeah,
yeah,
read that
and
one.
had to figure out how to survive in the wild, and lots of Louis L'Amour. My dad was a Louis L'Amour fan, so westerns.
Okay.
The Sacketts were a family that kind of goes throughout several groups of novels, and these are all just gunfighters in the Wild West, and Louis L'Amour. It's sort of like he was one of those guys that turned out 2 or 3 novels a year, and so these weren't like high quality literature, but there was a lot of ideas about how to be a man that were embedded in those. And then at some point I got into like Hank the Cowdog.
Oh, read that one too. Yeah, that one's great.
Those are fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just so dumb and goofy and just lovely. And yeah, of course, like my sister recently for my birthday bought me a Calvin and Hobbes kind of epic book set.
Okay.
And so there's also comic books. I used to just devour Calvin and Hobbes.
Comics are something that I wish and it's not too late, so I really should just get on it. But I never really got into them a lot. I never owned any comic books. The most I've done is, and I feel like within the last few years, I can count like maybe 5 times I've looked at the Sunday comics or whatever because somebody happened to have the paper out, and as I'm growing up, I sure I did that occasionally, but I never really got into that. Or the comic book universe type of thing, which now is obviously bigger and better than ever.
Yeah.
But let's stay on track with the reading
Right.
here. Easy.
Yeah, we could just keep going the whole, and everyone that's out in the audience is like, "Come on, guys."
Yeah.
Like,
Get to that part.
when did you read Twilight? That's what I'm really interested in.
Yeah. And another real quick thing, since Danielle brought it up in the chat, is anime and manga.
Oh,
which
yes,
is another thing I've not got into at all, but certainly have some friends have. But I guess I'll use this time to say that's the important thing to recognize is that you can read what you want. It does not matter if you're young, if you're old, or whatever. Like, even if you have the required reading that you need to do, I'd encourage you to keep doing that reading that you want to do. Especially if you're somebody who, one, just like you want it from the entertainment aspect, there's the fiction side of things, and then there's also the nonfiction side of things. So let's transition a little into that. So for me, to fast track my story, after 30 minutes later, long story short, is like long story long is really what I like to say all the time. So long story long, got into high school, started to have more required things, started to use more things like Cliff Notes and Spark Notes, which were essentially summaries of the things in order to essentially learn enough to be able to do the essays and answer the questions and things like that. So from a very, very relatively early age, you could recognize my incentives. It was all right. Little time as possible to achieve the result. Trying to get the score without the work, without really learning from the things. And so, and I do. Regret is a strong word. I actually try not to regret much, right? But I do kind of wish that I did engage a little more, because there were these key books that have been around forever where it's like I probably didn't give those as much as I could, and I didn't engage with those in the level I could, and I do feel like I missed something there. But again, now I can always go back, right? So
yeah. I think that's at the time going through school, incentive structures are aligned a certain way. And even then, the other thing about a good book anyway is that you can read it when you're 12 and get one idea out of it. I think I did read something like Brave New World when I was in my teens, and then I recently re-listened to it like last year and was just blown away by all the psychology that's embedded in it that I didn't pick up on when I was younger.
yeah.
So as you get older, you're going to bring more back to it. So I think sometimes you could, if you're just pulling the Cliff Notes version, but you're absolutely right too about this idea that, you can, depending on your incentives, if it's just to make the grade, you can skim, or you can take the Cliff Notes version, but there's also something to be said about the hard work of getting in and digging yourself and what you're going to get out of it. And it's kind of that DIY thing again, where you end up pulling a little bit of pride out of it because you went down into the trenches, you did the actual work yourself, and you came out with your own conclusions.
Yeah, and you had some maybe original thoughts. And even if you end up with the same kind of conclusion that other people do, doesn't mean that that process wasn't valuable and that you weren't learning things along the way. So I wanted to point out, so AR ended for me, and either late middle school, I feel like, and that's when it kind of transitioned to that more high school type of thing, and that's when I stopped reading other than those skimming and things like that. And then for me, it wasn't at college. The only reading I ever did was largely textbooks and things like that. I'm an electrical engineer major, so not that there's a ton of reading involved in the major itself. But then it wasn't until a few years after I graduated when I started to read again, and that started with things that I was interested in. And I think it started out with the biography of I don't know exactly which one it was, but maybe it was Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or one of these big entrepreneur tech titans type of people, right? And then I started to get a little more into that and entrepreneurship and business and a little bit of self-improvement and things like that. And that's kind of how my nonfiction side started. And then at one point I was having a little trouble falling asleep, and I heard someone say like, oh, you should read fiction right before you go to bed. And obviously this can vary a lot based on the type of fiction. Like if it's a thriller and you're like, is he gonna die, is he gonna die, like right, probably not the best one to read before bed, especially if you're worried about nightmares and things like that.
And they've gotten so good now at making them all compelling, just like Netflix, right, where it hits the end of the chapter and you're just like, oh, I can't stop here, I gotta keep going.
But there's a lot that do a really good job, at least for me, where it's like, all right, one, I'm turning off my brain from the regular world and I'm disappearing into this world. And especially as you kind of get started and you get immersed in, like, you're familiar with the characters and that kind of thing, and you can kind of enjoy that until you kind of get a little sleepy, and then you either fall asleep with it on your hand or you put it to the side. And so that's kind of how I started reading fiction, and that was I don't know, maybe 7 years ago now, and I've been keeping that up for a while. And then I shifted to audiobooks, which is when my quote-unquote reading went through the roof, and that was largely for more of these nonfiction types of things. And that was because maybe like yourself, every time I sat down to read it, I found myself a little struggling and I wasn't able to get through it. And also I found, around that time roughly, I had gotten into podcasts, and I was listening to podcasts and listening to them at a 2x speed, and I could get and retain that information really well. And just like anything else, by the way, that is a skill. A lot of people like hear the faster speed or hear podcasts like, oh, I can't retain any of that. Oh, it doesn't, just goes in one ear, not the other. It's like, it's a skill. Like, you can develop it, and sure, some people are more naturally good at it than others, and some people may always be better to read the physical book versus the audiobook, but it is a skill you can do and you can train. And the beauty of the audiobook, and the reason that it resonated so well with me, was because I could do it all these other times. I did not have to schedule this time. Oh, Reed, you need to be sitting in this chair and go get in your 30 minutes of reading, because the reality was I wasn't making that happen. And so that's when I was like, okay, well, while I'm cleaning, while I'm driving, while I'm walking the dog, whatever all of those things are, I can have my hands busy and whatnot, and then but still be thinking, right?
Yeah.
There are certain tasks that are better for it than other, right? But the ones that are kind of mindless, like doing the dishes, is like a perfect example where it's like my hands are busy, and okay, but I can think and take quotes and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly common. I mean, it's one of the reasons they say that podcasts and audiobooks are just booming so much, because we have an attention economy, we have a productivity economy. Like, people are trying to be productive all the time, and these take up less of your attention than almost any other way to consume media, because you can just listen through your ear, and a lot of times you can sort of zone out for a second and then tune back in and you're just fine. It's when it comes to podcasts, I listen to a whole variety of them. When it comes to fiction books, mostly that's on audiobook. And then whenever I read something dense or something that I'm really trying to retain, I tend to go with physical books for that. I will do them both sometimes. Sometimes I have the audiobook and the physical book, and I go through them at the same time to reinforce each other. And that might seem like a duplication of effort, but there's some things about learning that is repetition over short periods of time. So it's something like if you use something and then 3 days later you encounter it again, and then within a month you have to use it one more time. There's something about this rule of three where if you have to use it within, I don't know, 3 weeks or a month, 3 times in a row, then you tend to retain it much better. So there's something about spacing it out over time. What I have found is that by doing my own podcast, if I'm reviewing a book, say I read the book, I take the notes for the book, maybe I'm also listening to the book, then I make an outline of the book and I try to turn that into podcast form. And then I do the podcast. Well, then I have to prepare the social media for the podcast later. So I'm encountering this information repeatedly, 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 which I found makes it stick more.
Yeah.
And unless I had put myself into this artificial construct of having to do the podcast and having to teach to an audience that isn't in front of me, then my retention of this information wouldn't be nearly as high.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it was great that you recognized that you weren't doing the thing, you weren't getting out of it what you wanted. So then you set up the system and the structure around it to encourage that behavior. And just so happened to be that by forcing yourself to teach others and actually bring value to others, it actually forced you to do the thing, right? Which is an important thing to highlight because I'm sure it's something inherent in our human, but I don't have the stats or whatever behind me. That it's a lot of times easier to do something for somebody else than it is to do for yourself, right?
Yeah, that's very so sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes indeed.
Yeah, and it sort of depends on what's going on with you, but yeah, I think there's also something about having a some sort of structure or network in place that's going to actually encourage you to put something out. It's really easy to put things off and declare it to be not important in the moment unless there is some sort of external framework or deadline that you have to meet. It's easy to put off your own deadlines as well. I think it's much harder to put off deadlines when there's somebody else involved.
Right.
So sometimes that can be a little bit of a help.
Yeah. So, real quick, writer, don't go on the long diatribe that I did, but why don't you tell us a little bit about how reading has evolved in your life?
Oh man, I was reading a lot while you were talking about being younger and reading. Then I was thinking that I used to get in trouble for reading after I was supposed to be asleep. Which is kind of silly to think about now, but I used to just hide under the covers and use a flashlight and read. And then I'd, of course, turn it off and close a book and pretend I was sleeping whenever I heard my door being opened by my parents who were checking on me. So I was kind of a voracious reader, and but it was mostly fiction. And I think at some point, even going through grad school, we had to read some sort of difficult texts. But I've always sort of enjoyed the idea that I'm gaining knowledge or learning something, and sometimes just pulling one or two pieces out of a book was all I really needed, and then I could sort of feel good about myself for having this extra piece of knowledge and an extra way to sort of encounter the world and to think about the world. So some of that comes with probably always wanting to be smart, but also wanting to have ways to look at the world that were different than other people. And I think that comes into my whole art practice was uncovering bias, discovering new things, figuring out how power structures and systems work, and then maybe even trying to redesign how something better might work. So part of that means that it's hard to redesign something when you don't understand why the pieces move the way they do.
Yeah. And all those things are what make you such a great co-host. Just to be frank, like I mean, that's part of what we're trying to do here, right? And is learn about all the structures and things that are going on, and then help teach people about them and figure out how to best work with them. Now, the one thing I want to point out is that even though this is how writer is reading, that does not mean that's what reading needs to be, right? Especially if you haven't read in a while.
No one needs to do what I do
Right.
the way I do it. And yeah, I think we're going to be pretty honest about that, but there's this kind of other side to taking steps, and I think Reed and I might have the kind of, I don't know, personal nature that's going to like force us to like keep on going, ooh, and what if I just did this better? What if I changed that? What if I tweaked this? And that might just be who we are inherently. So there are other people who read completely differently. They pull different lessons out of it. We're actually excited to talk to those people too. Whenever I talk to people that they read completely different things than I do in a completely different way. I talked to a guy on Sunday who pretty much never reads an entire book. He skims it, maybe reads one chapter, and he's done.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what? What? No, you can't do. You have to start from the beginning, go to the end.
Which is great. And I was going to bring up the same concept, which was, as this, in this Rome, using the Rome research, we've in this book club called Rome Book Club, and Rome Book Club 5, we read this book called How to Read a Book. And it was one of those times where like, oh, again, returning to the basics. Oh, this is so simple or whatnot. I know how to read a book, but then it's like, no, actually, no. There are better ways to read it, and there are these different ways you can read it. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that another day, because we want to make sure we have time for our special tarot reader today. And then also, I will mention that we'll talk about the writing aspect a little more. Today we were really focusing on read. Great day.
So happy.
Yeah. But some other day we'll talk a little more about writing and maybe writer.
Yeah. I'll be the writer. You be the read.
Yes. Yes. Well done. But yeah, the big takeaway from the How to Read a Book for me was the fact that you can read it differently, and there is a value in skimming, and you don't need to read everything cover to cover, because I've the number of books that I've started but not finished is maybe like 2 in my life, and I'm hoping for that number to go up, because it's like, all right, it's okay to just skim the book. It's okay to read the things, to get what you want out of it, and move on. And that's what this helped me do and helped me get down to. Any other last thoughts on reading before we move over to this?
No. Let's hop over to this reading.
Okay. Well, real quick, wanted to give our challenge for today before we transition to Danielle for a little Tarot Tuesday. So the challenge for today is read something. And it's pretty straightforward. You don't need to take any more than that. But I would encourage you to
more
read
than the headline, maybe,
yes,
on
yes,
Facebook.
Yes.
Maybe more than that.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And I was going to say, and maybe read something in a different media than you're used to, right? Like, if you're like, well, I always read articles. Well, okay, there's value in reading articles. Like, I'm not going to say that's not true, but maybe start reading a short story or a novel or an essay. If you haven't heard of Sedaris, what's his first name? David Sedaris. He's a very common essayist, popular essayist and humorist, and we actually brought him up the other day. And he had an article that came out, sometime within the last few months about his dad, who his dad had just passed, and talked about as he got older and his brain started changing, and how it actually revealed a different side of his dad. It was really interesting, and I think you guys might find it interesting as well. But of course, it also could be a comic book or something else. And
change it up.
Yeah, just start reading something, right? I mean, you could literally right now, if you wanted to, go get an ebook right here while we're sitting here watching Danielle and hearing from her, and you could get that started later today. So go start reading something. Do it for Read. Team Read. But with that, we're going to transition over to Danielle, and she is going to give us a lovely tarot reading. And I would like to point out that Danielle has some lovely blue hair with us today. She has a amazing stylist that she went to. Danielle, why don't you hold up your hand so people can see if they can figure out who that stylist might have been. Oh, they actually look much better than yesterday.
Yeah, I used my sugar scrub, but this one's pretty bad.
Blue dabu dee dabu die. So I'm gonna turn this mic around for you, and then why don't you just get us started? And who would you like to read for today? What would you like to read? Give us some context for what you're thinking.
Yes. Well, I was thinking, since we're talking about reading differently, what we've done so far have both been the past, present, future spread. And so today I was thinking we could just pull one card that will be our daily draw for the day. And then we'll just focus on the one card. You can choose to look up a meditation that's based on that card. You can journal around that card. It could be looking up an article, or the story of that tarot card is the thing you read today. So however you choose to use the daily card to reflect. And I'm just going to shuffle until one flies out, since we haven't done that yet.
So do they really fly out?
I mean, if I could, make my hands work this morning.
I'll make sound effects to go with it.
So that one kind of went a little askew. Sometimes it sticks out to me.
A little ajar.
Okay. So This is the King of Cups, which is the water suit. And I mean, it also, so the water can call to mind the, if you're into astrology, we just entered Scorpio season and I'm a Pisces. And so like people are like, oh, your hair's so mermaidy. So it's like, yeah, feeling all the like ocean Pisces vibes. That's what I I think of.
Yeah, so for those who are audio only, why don't you give us a quick description of what that looks like?
Okay, so the King of Cups, he is basically, it's a man. He has a crown. He's sitting on a throne that looks sort of like a seashell and has like seahorses on it, and it's on like a platform in the middle of the ocean. And he's dressed in blue. He's wearing like a fish necklace and has the cup in his hand. So that's like the suit. He's the King of Cups, and there's a dolphin in the background and a ship in the background.
And he looks a little grumpy.
Well, they say you see yourself in your cards. And I'll
cackling.
remind people about the different like types of cards, right? Like not all of them look this way.
Right. So this card is, it's within the suits. So there's cups, pentacles, swords, and wands. So this is the cup suit, and then within the suits there's like the numbers ace through 10, but then there are the court cards. So there's the page, the knight, the queen, and the king. So this is the King of the Cup suit, and since there's actually 4 suits and 4 court cards in each suit, they also, we've talked about before how they can refer to the Myers-Briggs personality type. So maybe what you do today is you read about the Myers-Briggs personality type associated with the King of Cups. So it's just a prompt. However you want to like look up the picture yourself, and sometimes I'll be like, help me remember what my dream was last night, or like what was the message or the lesson I was supposed to take away from that dream, and then pull a card and then look up the meaning of that card and use it to help me remember my dreams. So you can do whatever with it.
Nice. I will say that I did not make a joke there that could have been very funny. You'll just have to trust me on that one.
No.
So real
No.
quick, no. Give us a recap. So this is the tell us about the card and give us our prompt one more time.
Okay, so the King of Cups. I guess I actually didn't even really talk about the card meaning that much, but yeah. So basically, the king is like the outward expression of the most positive qualities or traits of that suit. So the cup suit refers to relationships, intuition, creativity, soft skills, emotions, basically the world of like relations, I guess. So this is usually talking about a personality type who is very good at like expressing love for others, and like has a strong self-love to where then your cup can overflow and give to others and like serve your people as the king. So that's just a very brief what the card could be referring to. And then as for what to do with it, you could look up the King of Cups and read about what the card means. You could read about the Myers-Briggs personality types. You could just journal based on whatever the image of the card makes you think of. Yeah.
What do you do personally when you do this kind of thing? Do you journal based off of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much. I just pull the cards, whether that's a single card for the day or my past, present, future spread, and then just write down what cards I got, what I kind of first thought of when I saw the card. Like sometimes a phrase or a saying will come to mind, or I'll think of a song, or like maybe I'm listening to my Spotify playlist, and as I flip over or as a card flies out, it was as this lyric was being said that then makes me think of, oh, that's going on. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
No, that sounds great.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to point out was that Yes, I know this looks silly.
I have to look down at the monitor and be like,
Yes, I have these new mics so we can have 3, but it still needs to be set up. So until then, you get the picture of me leaning over. Hi.
hello.
But yeah, I wanted to tie this into our reading today and point out that much like reading, like you can do what you want with it, and you can kind of interpret things how you want, and you can take what you want out of it. And that's the beauty of tarot is it gives you these prompts, right? It gives you these things. It causes you to think things, which is one of the things I did not highlight personally for reading, but both on the nonfiction as well as on the fiction side. That's one of the biggest things for me that I've really enjoyed about reading is it's enabled me to learn a little bit, like even through fiction, like I get to see these things play out in these other worlds, right? And you get to learn about these characters, see the things they go through, and especially if you're somebody who maybe doesn't like dealing with their feelings and their thoughts and things like that, fiction can be a really great way to start kind of engaging with that because you can see what these people are going through. You can hear what they're thinking in their own mind. You can see what their thoughts and feelings are and things like that. So I really enjoy fiction for that side of things and nonfiction as well. But yeah.
Yeah, no, the fiction thing is interesting because as you're talking about it, my wife has told me before that I really take on whatever book I'm reading or listening to. I really get involved. I'm really quite empathetic to the characters. And that means if they're having a hard time in the book, I start taking on those emotions. And so I occasionally have to go on a fiction cleanse. I have to get away from fiction and go to like nonfiction because sometimes it just hits me too hard.
Yeah.
I'm just too darn sensitive.
Or reread fiction books that you know are going to make you feel a certain way when you read them.
Yeah,
Because it's like after I watch a scary movie and I have to go watch a Disney movie or a Friends episode, it's like after I read a book that's like really difficult, I'm like, oh, I think I want to go back and reread this book that was this light little romance that just made me feel real good.
Yeah, a little
yeah.
palate cleanser and go back to the comfort zone. And yeah, I think we tend to do a lot of that really. And especially with television, Suanne and I, after watching something like a Squid Game episode, we're like, I've got to go watch a cartoon.
Yep.
Yeah, Squid Game's definitely one of those that I don't want to be watching Squid Game right before I go to bed.
No.
Not the best, and it has you kind of on edge. So real quick, I wanted to acknowledge one of our favorite commenters has appeared for today, and that is Nola. And
Yes,
and
Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Oh, Tarzan.
Yes, that was one of the first big books. My parents were reading it to all of us when we were kids. And we had this leather-bound edition of it, and I remember that being one of the first books we were supposed to be reading a little bit every night to us, and I couldn't stand not reading that book, so I would like try to sneak in and read extra, read ahead, and but just totally fell in love with Edgar Rice Burroughs and the Tarzan series and everything else. So yeah,
That's awesome, and thank you so much for bringing that up. And please, next time, bring some more embarrassing stories because we know you know a lot that we need to expose.
Yeah, Mom, stop.
So the one thing I wanted for us to end with was, Danielle, I wanted you to tell us a little bit about what reading means in your life and how it's played a part through your phases of life. Because, I mean, you've been a very voracious reader your whole life, I feel like. And also now as a writer, I bet you maybe look at books a little bit differently. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what reading's meant for you over the years?
Yeah, well, I guess my elementary school story sounded very similar to yours. And then probably where I started to differ was in high school, where we had to start reading all of the books that we were assigned. I would do the Spark Notes and Cliff Notes for the books for the school, but I would keep reading what I wanted to be reading as I was going to bed. And also my sister and I had to, like, when we were in elementary school and we had earlier bedtimes, we would like scheme in our Jack and Jill bathroom, like, okay, I'm going to yell down and ask for 2 more chapters. And then you yell down and we would ask for later bedtimes so that we could read.
Nerd alert!
But yeah, that was, I've always read. There was maybe a time like in early adulthood where I didn't. But, and what I was going to say, to use a phrase you use, I don't have the studies on me, but I do believe there are studies that have said that reading fiction books is like one of the best ways to train empathy or build empathy as a like interpersonal skill. And there's not really a lot of like, I think, simulated other than real life relationships where you can learn that. So that's why I love fiction and love reading and want to write. So.
Well, I think that's great. And I will point out that we've had our third co-host join us. 1 second.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, Lincoln. He's about as big as you, Daniel.
For those of you who are just on audio, our dog Lincoln has joined us, which I don't know if he's made a camera appearance yet.
I don't know. He pushed open the door, though. He wanted to make his debut today.
Yeah, he's like, Mom and Dad are both in here. So Lincoln's a 75-pound dog. He's a rough collie. For those who have heard of this show Lassie, which may have also started as a book. Maybe?
Maybe.
So Lassie, the book, movie, TV show. He is that same type of dog. But yes, he wanted to be a part, and he reads all the time. So, to recap for today, we talked a lot about reading. That was our main topic. Talked a little bit about what that looked like in my life, in Ryder's life, and now in Danielle's life. We talked about some of the different ways you can read, setting up the systems to where if you realize that reading one way isn't really working for you, maybe try out a different system. Maybe try out a different structure. Or this may work for a lot of you. Maybe try and pull in a friend or a couple of friends, and you could read a book together. You could read a book separately. And I'm glad that you brought up reading to somebody. Real quick,
Yeah.
Danielle, why don't you tell the story about that David Sedaris essay from the other day and how that one got read?
Very badly. Reed was in the shower and was like, "Do you want to read this David Sedaris essay to me?" And so I'm like shouting over the water, and then I don't know why I didn't keep reading.
Oh, well, now you got to go back and finish it. So you're going to go back and finish that article. But it was funny because I was reading this article and I was like, Danielle, I think you'll like this. And I was like, here, I want to keep reading this, but I got to get in the shower. And so I got in the shower and I brought a chair over and I was like, you sit here and read out loud to me. I'm like, we've never done this before, but so maybe that's what it looks like. Maybe you need to have someone. Maybe just if you have a significant other, without telling them, just show up in the bathroom and be like, I am here to read for you. Well, that about wraps us up for today. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And as a reminder, the challenge for today is to read something. And as a writer so aptly pointed out, read more than just a headline and maybe read something that's a little different than what you would normally read.
Yeah.
Well, with that, everyone have a wonderful day.